Good morning to all of my sun haters and other morning people. John Doom, good to see you. Uh, Chris, Bob, and JD, always wonderful to see all of you in the morning. Welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM. This is a show where we sit around and we talk about games, game design, adventure design, writing, all of that. And today we're concluding our discussion of space opera, looking at the experience of what brings space opera to life for our players. I think next week I'm going to take a step away before we get into science fantasy and do an after action report. I have um, had a really great game of Jackals last night, and looking at starting a Savage Worlds game here soon, which I'm really excited to talk about my planning and my prep. It's going to be a one-on-one Deadlands game, and so hopefully I'll be able to share that on the show. And Grom, good morning to you. I don't hate the sun either, but I appreciate people who do. I'm married to one, and it just keeps the rhythm of the world moving, I think. So, we've talked a lot about space opera and the things that define it. The genre, the mechanics, the tropes, the things that bring together space opera in fiction, in media, in novels. So how do we put that together at the table? Well, I think the key to making a good space opera experience for players is expanse. Not the expanse, although I do love the expanse, but expanse, this sense of grandeur and greatness and limitless opportunities and potential. We talked about it near sci-fi where you want to really stress the danger and the time loss in travel. Ignore that in space opera. Space should be fast. It should be travel should take time, but that should not ever be the limiting. Travel time should only come up if and when it is dramatically appropriate. See JD's favorite show, Babylon 5, and how fast Star Furies fly, but also think about like Star Trek, right? How often do we have captains asking to increase the speed in hopes that we get to some disaster in time? So how do we do that? One, I think multiple plot threads is always something that works well in a space opera game to kind of make the players feel like the universe is larger than they. Now, again, with space opera, let's take a step back. The focus should be on the players. The players are the people at the intersection of destiny. Think again about Star Trek. How often is the Enterprise at the heart of what is going on? DS9, Babylon 5, the people on the station are the people that will control the fate of the world. When we step into the space opera, or sorry, science fantasy subgenre, these are the chosen ones. But in space opera, these are the people who the story is revolving around. So you want to keep the spotlight focused on them. They are special, they are resilient, they are able to affect great change, but they are not the only ones who are like that. That's why we need to step back. So, a great book about how to write multi-threaded plots is the DC Comics Guide to Writing Comics. Just as a side note, isn't it weird that it's DC Comics? Because DC stands for Detective Comics, so it's technically Detective Comics Comics. DC squared. Anyway, they have a really great section in that book on how to track A plots, B plots, C plots, just all the way through. And I love using that in games because one, it lets the players feel as if time is moving on and is that as if there are too many things for them to do. And to quote John Wick, again, the game designer, I will very rarely quote John Wick, the movie assassin. Just going to toss that out. I will call out the movie assassin if I choose to quote him. But John Wick, the game designer, talks about how you should always have plans going on that if the players don't engage with, they will come to fruition, and it will always come to fruition at the worst possible time, at the last possible second, which is, of course, when heroes shine. It's the job of heroes to show up at the last second and prevent things from going, to hell in a handbasket. Good morning, Padre and Rook. Good to see you as well. The Department of Redundancy Department. Yes. Was it in DOS for Dummies? Which I realize I'm dating myself just a little bit. But in DOS for Dummies, they had circular logic, see circular logic in the index or the glossary. Loved that. So, how do we do that? Well, the thing is, space opera is a grand, large setting. That's kind of the point of space opera. We want to include things that are happening on the grand scale. Politics, war, trade, all happen and are all tapestries that are woven together as the backdrop. You don't need to focus on them if your characters don't like them, but bringing them up, if your players don't like politics, don't write political storylines for them, but show that the political things in the background are having effects on their world. Now, we focused a lot on the space side of space opera, right? The technology, the weirdness, the vast number of choices of everything from starships to gear to species you can choose from to weird psionic powers and strange esoteric organizations like psychohistorians. But we sometimes leave the opera side of things at the side of a discussion when talking about sci-fi. And so I think this bears a little bit of our time in discussing the experience at the table and why it should have an operatic feel to it. And I don't mean that your players should be belting out the Barber of Seville, but in opera, the melodrama plays high because you're trying to tell a story of passion, of emotion, of the things that make us human writ large in a short amount of time. And a lot of people will look down on space opera and be like, oh, it's another single biome planet. It's a feature. It's not a bug. Space, in the same way that we want our characters to be writ large and, I don't want to say stereotypical, but archetypal. Planets are the same way. When you throw a desert planet like Dune in front of your players, you are telling them something about the character of the world that they are on. The swamp planet of Dagobah, the ice planet of Hoth, the ruins of Yavin, some of the strangeness in the Hamilton novels, the dreaming void at the center of the galaxy. Think of all of the Kirby, if you are a fan of comics, all of the Kirby space opera. If you've only experienced Kirby through the MCU, Sakaar, the junk planet. It allows us to establish the character and the nature of a thing in a very operatic lens. It gives the view of the world in a very specific way. We want to do the same thing with characters. Hey, thanks to Rookcat for his generosity, and welcome to all of the new Iconic subscribers. We at Iconic greatly appreciate you showing up, and Rook, as always, man, thank you so much. So characters should be archetypes. These are things like, well, go back to our fantasy analogs, right? This is where heroic and high fantasy, you're going to have classes. I'm not saying you need classes in science fiction, and in fact, some of the best sci-fi space opera games don't have classes. I'm looking right at Savage Worlds, Infinity, Traveler. Like, these are iconic space opera games that don't... Fading Suns, although Fading Suns has the archetypes, but once you establish the archetypes, it kind of expands from there. So, you want your characters to be iconic, And what I mean by that is as a icon for something, a symbol for something. So you have the noble knight, the rebel leader, the noble aristocrat, the smuggler with the heart of gold. These are keys in space opera. They act as shorthands for the place that they take in the galaxy. So I think these are all key to bringing space opera alive at the table. You want the science fiction trappings, you want the pseudoscience, you want the psionics, you want the aliens, you want the travel. That brings up another point, and this can be detrimental to people who prefer a more local experience in gaming. And what I mean by that is they want to dig into the one community and really establish roots, know everyone in the city, that sort of thing. In a space opera game, going from planet to planet, maybe each adventure have it set on a new world. Keep the characters and the NPCs connected, but showing off the different vistas, that sense of, I'm sorry, you don't have a place to call home because the universe is so vast. That's key to the experience of our space opera games. Now, the last thing I would keep in mind as a space opera GM is to really keep it weird. Space opera has things that no one knows or suspects. Think about that first time you're watching Empire and they land on the asteroid, and the asteroid cavern that they land in is actually alive. It's the home of some creature floating on a potato asteroid. That's after they've dealt with the Minox. That's after. Keep pushing to new vistas. Now, it's easy to drift into the absurd there, and I would be... I'm going to make a critical comment about a game that I love, Numenera. They love the weird in Numenera, but it's a very... how do I want to put this? A very surface level weird. There's a lot of bizarre, but it's bizarre for the sake of bizarre and it has no tie back to the story. And I think it's easy to do that in space opera. But the thing to remember is part of the love of science fiction is that love of reality and that love of connection, and the view of the future. So if you can tie your weird back to something, if there's a weird creature, it's because it's here on a planet that has a unique atmosphere or biome, or because it's on an airless asteroid. If it's a weird new species or mental power, how does that actually fit into the fabric of everything you are doing? If it's a secret society that the players are uncovering, how have they kept undetected for so long? I'm sort of looking at the MCU at this point. Don't get me wrong, I love Marvel Comics and they have a ton of secret societies. But you're getting to the point where you're like, okay, at least in today's day and age, how are all of these secret societies as secret as they are and as world-spanning as they are? So, that is... oh, Maid Marian. We're talking about first loves about from movies. Princess Leia, The One Gallon Goofy, Maid Marian in Disney. It's Robin Hood. That's a good one. Yes, if everything is, as John brings up a good point, if everything just exists on the surface level, do you want murder hobos? Because that's how you get murder hobos. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with murder hobos. I think the funny thing about... all right, we're going to digress here, which I can do because, you know, here we are. Murder hobos only exist if you remove alignment from D&D. If alignment is in place, then what you have are essentially jackals who are going out and pushing back chaos and creating more space for civilization. If you remove alignment from D&D, that's when they make the shift to murder hobos, in my in my personal opinion, yes, JD, thank you for pointing out that it is a hot take. I think if you decouple alignment from the worldview of D&D, then yes, a traditional way of playing the game is essentially murder hoboism. But I would say the same thing kind of in, you guys know how much I love Deadlands. But if the posse isn't out there trying to reduce fear and take on genuine evil, then what separates them from bandits? It's really the goals, and it's really the starkness of some of the morality. All right, so Rook says his Friday crew has to deal with a subplot of wizards having to be licensed through certain guilds to be legally allowed to be out and about. So the subplots in the background matter. Yeah, that's a great way to handle that. I know in Josh's Geberkan game, there's that whole thing about the Vreeman oath system that becomes a massive plot in most of the stories centered in and around Vreem. All right, so when we get back, we are going to cover, or on Tuesday, we're going to do an after action report, and then next Thursday, we're going to get into science fantasy, which I think will take us through the end of the year. And then in the new year, because you guys have requested, I will do a shorter series on horror, because I do believe all horror can be broken down into really 3 types. Horror of the body, horror of the mind, and horror of the soul. So corporeal, psyche, and noetic horror. And maybe we'll talk about those all 3 in a series, or we'll talk about them kind of mixed together. So, hey, John, thanks. I appreciate you for saying that. I know that this was the continuation of this series was something that was requested by the chat. The original impetus for this series was based off some talks I was having with a friend named Ian about the genres of fantasy, and he's like, you should really talk more about this. I was like, all right, well, let's see that. I do think that we're going to look at some more adventure and monster design next year. I have a couple of monsters I want to flesh out for Jackals that I think I'd love to share the discussion with you guys, because of course we created just such great monsters like the Katpupa and the werewolves of the Zaharets. So as we approach to the end of the year, I hope you guys are all having a wonderful time. We'll be back on Tuesday with the grand campaign will be going live. We're going to be having a live show on Saturday morning. It'll be our last grand campaign for 2022. We'll finish out our Space 1889 playthrough on Tuesday night. Tuesday, I'll be back with an after action report for Behind the Screen. And then we are really looking forward to our fireside chat on I believe the 13th. It's not this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. And again, if you want to submit any letters or audio files to play or share on the channel, I would love to be able to do that while we are having our just sit down with the tour group, rounding out our year. And then the final thing for 2022 will of course be our Bureau G Christmas special. So excuse me. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. Thanks, Padre. I'm glad that the Sword and Sorcery one was so helpful for you. We'll be back on Tuesday, and I hope you all have a good one. See you all later.